The heat came off the apron in slow waves, the kind that bend the far end of a runway into water that is not there. And I was halfway across that shimmer with 60 pounds of ruck riding my spine and a duffel dragging off my left shoulder when a man decided out loud that I did not belong on his flight line. 60 pounds too much for you, honey, he called, and the words carried the way words carry on open concrete, flat and far, and impossible to pretend you did not hear. Terminal's the other way. Family day was last weekend. I did not stop walking. I have learned that stopping is the first thing they want, because stopping is a kind of answer. And a man who talks like that is fishing for an answer the way a boy pokes a snake with a stick, hoping it will rear up and prove the poking was justified. So I kept my pace even, kept the ruck square, and let the duffel drag its slow groove across the tarmac behind me. And I looked at him the way you look at weather, without heat, the way you look at a thing that is happening to you but is not about you. He was a sergeant. I could read the chevrons from 30 feet, even in the glare, and I could read the rest of him too, the way he had planted his boots and cocked one hip, the way he had angled himself so his 3 Marines had a clear line of sight to the show he was about to put on. He was young, 26, maybe 27, with the kind of face that has never once been genuinely afraid, and a voice pitched to reach the back row. I had carried heavier things than that ruck, and farther and up worse grades than a level apron in the sun, and I had never once, in 23 years, been asked if I could manage. Not by anyone whose respect I needed. It is a strange thing to be asked, at 41, whether you can lift your own bag, by a boy who was learning to ride a bicycle the year I first learned what a man's weight feels like, when it goes slack against you and you have to decide, in a half second, whether you can carry it and shoot at the same time. "You need a hand, ma'am?" he said, and he made the word ma'am into something small and soft and useless, the way certain men can turn a courtesy into an insult by the pressure they put on it. "Or are you looking for the tour? Tours are back by the gate." His Marines laughed. Not all of them. One of them, a lance corporal with a sunburn peeling off the bridge of his nose, laughed the loud way you laugh when you're 20 and terrified of being the one who does not. And the other 2 gave the low, hedging chuckle of men keeping their options open. I clocked all of it. You learn, if you live the life I have lived, to read a group of men the way a farmer reads a sky, because your morning depends on it. I reached the low baggage cart parked near the terminal doors, the flatbed kind with the rusted rail, and I set the duffel on it and leaned the ruck against the rail to get the strap off my shoulder for a moment, because my shoulder had earned that moment somewhere over the Atlantic 11 hours before. The sergeant walked over. He did not have to. That is the part I keep. When I turn the morning over in my memory, he did not have to close the distance. He chose to. He came right up to the cart, and with the flat of his hand, he shoved the ruck off the rail so it toppled and hit the concrete with the particular dead thud of a full pack, 60 pounds of gear going nowhere, and he grinned at his Marines while he did it. "She won't last an hour," he said. I looked at the ruck on the ground. I looked at him, and then I bent down, both knees, the way you are taught so your back lasts into your 40s, and I picked it up. I have found, over a long time, and in a lot of rooms, that the fastest way to end a performance is to refuse to be the audience. You do not argue. You do not flush. You do not give the small hurt sound they are waiting for. You simply do the thing they said you could not do without hurry, and you let the silence that follows belong to them. I shouldered the ruck. I picked up the duffel, and I walked the last 30 feet to the terminal under my own power, and the laughter came after me across the apron like exhaust off a taxiing jet, hot and thin and already dispersing, and I did not look back, because I did not need to see him to know exactly what he looked like. I had met him before. Not him, but him. 100 times in 100 uniforms, on 3 continents. He is always sure. That is the one thing that never changes about him. He is always so sure. What none of them knew, what the sergeant could not have known, as he stood there certain he had measured me and found me light, was that in a little under 2 hours, a man with 3 stars on his collar was going to get out of a car on that same apron and walk to me across the same stretch of concrete, and that the flight line I had just crossed like a lost dependent was about to learn, all at once, and in front of everyone, exactly who had been carrying her own ruck through their morning. But I am getting ahead of the road. Let me take it in order, because order is the only honest way to tell it, and because the part that matters is not the car. The part that matters is what I decided in the 90 seconds before it arrived. The terminal was cool and dim after the glare, and it smelled like every military passenger terminal I have ever waited in. Burnt coffee and floor wax, and the particular boredom of people who travel at the government's convenience rather than their own. I set my gear down against the wall by the window, out of the traffic lane, and I lowered myself into a hard plastic chair and let my spine unkink one vertebra at a time. You learn the most about a person in the 90 seconds they believe you are no one. I have built a whole life on that single piece of arithmetic. It has never failed me. Rank tells you what a person was willing to do to get promoted. A uniform tells you what a person wants you to think. But watch how someone treats a stranger who can do nothing for them, who cannot reward them or report them or remember them. And you will know, in a minute and a half, everything worth knowing. I had spent the flight in civilian clothes, gray travel pants, and a plain shirt gone soft and creased from 11 hours in a canvas seat, my hair pulled back and coming loose at the temples, my face bare and tired, and 41. No rank on me anywhere. Nothing to read. I had checked a weapon and a set of orders and a career into the belly of that plane, and I had walked off it, looking like exactly what the sergeant took me for, a woman in her 40s hauling too much luggage. And that was fine. That was, if I'm honest, a kind of rest. It is tiring to be read correctly all the time. There is a strange freedom in being underestimated, if you can keep your feet under you while it happens. A master sergeant came through the terminal with a clipboard and a slow, deliberate walk, a big man going gray at the sides, and he saw me sitting there with my gear and my exhaustion, and he changed course. "Long flight, ma'am," he said. "Long enough," I said. He looked at the ruck and the duffel against the wall, and something in him took a reading, and he set his clipboard down on the counter and went to the water cooler in the corner and filled a paper cone and brought it to me without being asked. "Sit as long as you need," he said. "Whoever's picking you up can wait. You look like you've been in a seat since yesterday." "I have," I said, and I took the water and I drank it, and it was the best thing anyone had handed me in 2 days. "Ardsley," he said, tapping his own chest, the name tape I could not see because he was giving it to me the courteous way, in words. "You need anything, I'm around." "Thank you, Master Sergeant," I said, and I meant it down to the floor. Kindness offered to a stranger who has nothing to give is the only reference I have ever fully trusted. Master Sergeant Ardsley did not know my rank. He did not know my name. He did not know that 10 minutes earlier, a sergeant on his flight line had shoved my pack onto the ground for sport. He knew only that a tired woman was sitting in a hard chair, and he decided that was reason enough to bring her water. In a life that has handed me a great many medals and a great many disappointments, I have come to believe that this small, unforced decency is the rarest and most valuable thing a person can carry, and that it cannot be issued, or ordered, or faked for long. You either bring the water, or you do not. I sat, and I drank, and for the first time in 11 hours, someone had treated me like I belonged, and I let myself feel it, because I knew the day was not done deciding what it thought of me. I have been underestimated so many times, in so many rooms that I could tell you the shape of it before it happens, the way an old sailor can smell a change in weather. It has a rhythm. First there is the glance that decides you, quick and total, before you have said a word. Then there is the small test, the errand handed to you, the coffee order, the question about whose assistant you are, the assumption that you are waiting for someone more important to arrive. And then, if you fail to be insulted by it, if you simply absorb it and keep your feet, there is the recalibration, sometimes fast and sometimes never, when the person is forced to account for the gap between what they decided about you and what turns out to be true. I stopped taking it personally a long time ago. That was the hardest lesson and the most useful one. When you are young, it feels like the world is singling you out, and you burn a great deal of fuel being angry at each individual man who gets you wrong. Then you get older, and you understand that it is not personal at all, which is somehow both a relief and a deeper kind of sad. They are not seeing you and rejecting you. They are not seeing you at all. They are seeing a category, and reading the category, and behaving toward the category. And the tragedy of it is entirely theirs, because while they are busy being certain, they are missing the actual person standing in front of them, who might have been worth knowing. I decided years ago that I would not let their blindness become my wound. I would carry my own weight and let them carry their own smallness, and I would not agree to trade. While I sat there, I did the thing I always do in terminals, which is drift. My body was in a plastic chair at a Marine air station in the year 2026, but my mind went where it goes when I am too tired to keep it on a leash, which is back and down and into a road in Helmand Province in the year 2014. I was a captain then, 29 years old, combat logistics, which is a fancy way of saying I moved things, fuel and water and ammunition and mail and men from where they were to where they were needed, along roads that other people had decided were safe enough. I had come up from the enlisted side. I had put on a uniform at 18 out of a mill town where the mill had already closed, and I had driven trucks before I ever led the Marines who drove them. And by 2014, I had a company's worth of vehicles and a reputation in certain staff sections for being reliable and quiet and not much else. There was a colonel's staff that called my convoy the milk run. I heard it. You always hear it. Someone will say a thing in a briefing tent believing that the person it is about is furniture, and the words will find their way to you, and you will file them. The milk run. A routine resupply push up a road that had been quiet for weeks, out to a command element that had gotten itself stretched thin at the far end of a valley. Bring them fuel and water and ammunition, the staff said, and bring the mail, and be back by dark. A milk run. I had learned by then not to argue with a word. You do not win the argument, and you spend credibility you will need later. And worst of all, you teach the road nothing. You let the road argue for you. The road is the only witness whose testimony they ever actually believe. We rolled at first light. I had a lance corporal on my truck named Wes Kimball, 19 years old, from somewhere flat and green in the middle of the country, a kid who had been in the Marine Corps for 14 months and in Afghanistan for 6 weeks, and who still said, "Ma'am," like it tasted good in his mouth. He was my radio operator that day. He had a gap in his front teeth and a photograph of a dog taped inside his helmet, and he talked. The whole first hour, in the loose, easy way of a boy who has not yet learned that some roads listen. There were men on that convoy who had made their own quiet arithmetic about me. I could feel it in the way a certain staff sergeant kept checking my calls against his own judgment, not out of insubordination exactly, but out of the settled assumption that the female captain was a formality and the real decisions would need a man's confirmation. I did not fight it in the wire. You do not correct a man's opinion of you in the middle of a valley. You let the day teach him, or you do not. But either way, the teaching does not come from arguing. It comes from what you do when the arguing time is over, and the only thing left is whether you are steady when the ground stops being. The valley that morning was the color of an old bruise, brown going to gray where the light had not yet reached, and the road ran straight and then bent at the narrow place where the wall came down close on the right and the dry canal ran deep on the left. I had driven that road twice before. I had told the operations shop both times that I did not like the narrow place, and both times the operations shop had thanked me for my input in the tone men use when they have already stopped listening. The milk run. I can still hear the word. Milk. As though anything in that country was that simple, that white, that harmless. "You think we'll see anything, ma'am?" he asked me, somewhere in that first hour. "I think we'll deliver fuel and be home for chow," I told him, which was the truth as I understood it, and which was a lie the valley was already preparing to correct. The strike came at the narrow place where the road pinched between a wall and a dry canal, the place any of us could have told the staff was the place, if the staff had asked, which the staff had not. The lead vehicle went up first. I felt it before I heard it, the way you feel a door slam in another room, the pressure change, and then the sound arrived and took the rest of the morning with it. An improvised explosive device, buried and command detonated, and then the small arms fire, opening up from the wall side, and then the radio filling with the particular noise that a good day does not make. And here's the thing I have never been able to explain to anyone who was not on a road like that one. The staff had called it the milk run. And in the first 10 seconds of the ambush, I understood, with a clarity that has never left me, that the command element we were resupplying was pinned worse than we were, farther up the road, past the strike, cut off, and that if my convoy fell back the way every instinct and every manual and every reasonable voice would tell us to fall back, those men were going to be alone in it. "We going forward, ma'am?" Kimball asked me. His voice had changed. It had gone high and then come back down, the way a voice does when a boy makes himself into something else in the space of a breath. "We're going forward," I said. "Stay on my voice." That is where the memory always stops itself. In the terminal, in the plastic chair, when I let it off the leash. It stops just there, at "we're going forward," at "stay on my voice." Because what comes after that is not a thing I take out and look at in a passenger terminal with a paper cone of water in my hand. What comes after that is the reason a man with 3 stars was, at that very moment, being driven toward the flight line where I sat. but he did not know I was there yet. And I did not know he was coming. And Wes Kimball, 19, with a dog taped in his helmet, did not come home, and I have never once, in 12 years, told that story as a victory. The terminal doors opened, and a gust of hot apron air came in with a corporal who was moving fast, and the drift broke, and I was 41 again, in a chair, in 2026, with a knee that ached from the flight and a morning that was not finished with me. Something was happening on the flight line. I could feel it before I could see it, the way you feel a room change when someone important walks into it, a stiffening, a rearrangement of attention. Through the terminal window, the apron had gone from its loose mid-morning rhythm to something taut. Marines who had been slouching were suddenly not. A tow tractor that had been idling was shut off. The corporal who had rushed in said something to Master Sergeant Ardsley, low and urgent, and Ardsley put down his clipboard and looked out the window with the flat, careful expression of a man who has just been told, the day is about to get more expensive. Out on the apron, I could see the sergeant, my sergeant, the one who had shoved my ruck to the ground, and he had gone from performer to something else entirely. He was squaring his detail away with sudden, frantic energy, snapping at the sunburned lance corporal, straightening his own cover, tugging his blouse down flat. "Look alive!" I heard him bark, muffled through the glass. "Somebody important's on the ramp. Move." I watched him rediscover his own standards the instant he believed someone worth impressing might be watching, and I felt something I have felt 1,000 times and have never gotten used to, which is the particular weariness of seeing a person be one man for those he thinks are beneath him, and another man entirely for those he thinks are above. It is the oldest tell there is. It is the whole of a person's character, written in the difference between those two men. A line of vehicles turned onto the flight line from the direction of base operations, dark and clean, and moving with the unhurried certainty of a schedule that other people rearranged their mornings around. Government sedans, a security element, the whole quiet apparatus that travels with a certain kind of rank. The apron organized itself toward the ramp, toward the aircraft, because that is where a distinguished visitor goes, to inspect, to be briefed, to shake the hands that have been pre-selected for shaking. But one car did not go to the ramp. One car, a dark sedan with a small flag on the fender and a red plate on the front that I could not read from inside, but that everyone on that apron could read fine, slowed, and drifted out of the line and rolled instead toward the terminal. Toward me. Not fast. The way a car moves when the person inside it is looking for something. It stopped perhaps 40 feet from the terminal doors. A young officer got out of the front passenger side. A captain, a woman, trim and squared away in service uniform with an AIDS cord looped at her shoulder, and she had a folded sheet of paper in one hand, and she lifted her head and scanned the apron. The faces, the Marines snapping to as she looked at them, and she was not finding what she was looking for among them. She unfolded the sheet. She read it again. And then she turned toward the terminal, and she came through the doors, and she stood in the cool, dim room and looked at the handful of us waiting there, and she spoke. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for a passenger who came in on the rotator this morning, a Major Holloway." The name landed on the flight line like a dropped tool. I heard it hit. I heard the small silence it made, and I stood up because it was mine. "I'm Major Holloway," I said. The captain looked at me. I watched her take in the gray travel pants and the soft creased shirt and the ruck against the wall and the paper cone of water in my hand. And I watched the arithmetic run behind her eyes, the same arithmetic the sergeant had run on the apron, except that this young officer had a name on a sheet of paper that told her the arithmetic was wrong, and so she did the thing the sergeant had not been able to do. She corrected. She straightened. Her chin came up and her shoulders set, and she looked at me not as a tired woman in civilian clothes, but as what the paper said I was. "Ma'am," she said. "Captain Massey, I'm the aide to the general. He asked me to find you the moment you landed." She paused, and something almost human crossed her professional face. "He's been trying to for a long time." Through the terminal window, out on the bright apron, I could see the sergeant. He had heard the name. He was close enough to the doors, in the frantic squaring away of his detail, that the name had reached him, Major Holloway, and I could see him turning it over, and I could see his face beginning to change before he understood why. The sunburned lance corporal beside him had gone still, and I stood there in the cool of the terminal with a paper cone in my hand and a captain waiting on my word, and I felt the whole morning tilt under me and begin, slowly, to run downhill toward a thing I had not seen coming when I stepped off the plane. "Trying to find me," I said. "For what?" Captain Massey held my eyes. "Ma'am," she said, "I think the general would rather tell you himself." I set the paper cone down on the window ledge. I looked out at the apron, at the car with the flag on the fender sitting patient in the sun, and I felt, rising up under my breastbone, the thing I have had to fight my whole life, which is not anger. People think it would be anger. It is not. It is the hunger. It is the low, clean, terrible hunger to be seen at last, all at once, in front of the very people who decided you were nothing. To watch their faces change, to let the wave crash over them and carry them out. I felt the whole apron leaning in, every Marine on it who had heard the name, hungry on my behalf, hungry for the sergeant to be destroyed in the sun. I have been that hungry before. I know what it tastes like. I know that it does not feed you. You eat, and you are never once full, because the thing you are actually hungry for is not their humiliation. It is your own worth, and that was never theirs to give or take, and so their faces changing gives you nothing in the end. But a moment, and then the moment passes, and you are exactly as worthy or unworthy as you were before, and now you have spent something you cannot get back. I knew all of that, standing there. I had learned it on harder ground than a flight line. But knowing a thing and doing it are two different countries, and I stood for a moment on the border between them and felt the pull of the wrong one. Out on the apron, the sergeant had figured out enough. He had put the name together with the woman in the terminal, and he had gone the color of the concrete, and the swagger had drained out of his stance so completely that he looked, suddenly, exactly as young as he was. The lance corporal beside him looked like he wanted the apron to open and take him, and around them the flight line had stopped working. Marines had drifted out of the hangar, out of the fuel pits, off the tow tractors, and they stood in a loose ring at a respectful distance, and they were all looking at the same two things, the general's car and the terminal door, and waiting to see what walked out of it. The sergeant came toward the terminal. He came the way a man walks toward something he cannot avoid, and he stopped just outside the doors, in the heat, and through the glass I could see his mouth working, trying to find the shape of a sentence that could unmake the last hour. Captain Massey glanced at him, then back at me, and she had the good sense to say nothing. I picked up my ruck. I want you to understand that this was a decision, and that I made it on purpose. There were 3 Marines within arm's reach who would have carried that ruck to the general's car at a word, who would have sprinted to do it, who would have fought each other for the privilege now that they knew. And I bent down, both knees, and I shouldered 60 pounds of my own gear, because whatever happened in the next 2 minutes, whatever the general said, whoever this turned out to be, no one on that flight line was ever going to be able to say that the car came for a woman who needed help lifting her bag. I had carried it across the apron as no one. I would carry it to the car as myself. The ruck did not get lighter when the name got heavier. That was the whole point. That had always been the whole point. I settled the strap on my shoulder, and I turned toward the doors, and the sergeant was there, on the other side of the glass, and I stopped in front of him on my way out, close, so that what I said would reach him and no one else. He got out one word, "Ma'am." And then, I didn't know. "I know you didn't," I said. And I looked at him, at the whole frightened young length of him, and I did not say the thing the apron wanted me to say, the thing that would have felt so good and fed me so little. I said, "Square your detail away, Sergeant. We'll talk after." I watched the word after go into him and do more than any dressing down I could have delivered in the sun. A dressing down ends. A dressing down is a squall, loud and total and over, and a man can shelter under his own resentment until it passes and come out the other side, telling himself he was hard done by. But after is a door left standing open onto a room you cannot see into. After is the long walk to a conversation whose terms you do not know. I had given him nothing to be angry at and everything to think about, and I saw in his face that it landed harder than lightning would have. Then I walked out into the glare, and I crossed the apron toward the car, carrying my own weight, and the ring of Marines watched me come, and 40 feet away the rear door of the sedan opened, and a man got out. He was older than the last time I had seen him. Of course he was. 12 years older, gray gone all the way through what was left of his hair, 3 stars on the collar of a man who had been a colonel the last time we stood on the same ground, Lieutenant General Malcolm Sinclair. He got out of the car himself, waving off the young Marine who reached for the door, and he stood, and he looked at me coming across the concrete with the ruck on my shoulder, and he did not move toward me right away. He just looked. He looked at me the way a man looks at a debt he had made peace with never being able to pay. Suddenly, impossibly standing in front of him in the sun. And then he came. He crossed the last of the distance between us, and the whole apron went so quiet I could hear the tick of cooling metal from the aircraft on the ramp. And he stopped 1 pace short of me, a lieutenant general stopping 1 pace short of a major, and the flight line did not know what it was looking at yet, but it knew it was looking at something. "Captain Holloway," he said. Then he corrected himself, and his voice was not steady, not entirely, not the voice of a man with 3 stars. "Major now, forgive me. I've called you captain in my head for 12 years. He stopped. He worked his jaw. "I have wanted to say this to your face for a very long time." The last time this man had seen me, I had been dragging his radio operator out of the passenger side of a burning vehicle with my hands hooked under the boy's arms and my boots slipping in the dirt, screaming into a handset for a medical evacuation bird, while the wall side of that road did its best to make sure none of us ever left it. He had been a colonel, pinned, cut off, at the far end of a valley that a staff section had called a milk run, and my convoy had been the thing that came up the road that no one should have driven up, and held the narrow place open and did not leave. "Sir," I said. It was all I had. He looked at the ruck on my shoulder. He looked at the ring of Marines. And then Lieutenant General Sinclair, in front of a flight line that had, 90 seconds earlier, watched a sergeant shove that same ruck onto the ground, said what he had come to say. He did not read a citation. He did not call the flight line to attention. He did not perform. He simply told me the truth, in a plain voice, loud enough only for the space between us, though in that silence it carried farther than he meant. 11 of us came off that road because you would not leave it," he said. "I have 11 men, Major, and everything 11 men become. Wives, children, whole lives, because a captain that a staff section called the Milk Run decided to drive toward the shooting instead of away from it. I have carried your name a long way." His eyes were bright, and he did not blink them clear, because a man who has earned 3 stars has also earned the right not to pretend. "I wanted to carry it back to you, in person, on the record, where people could hear it." I held his eyes, and I did not let myself cry on a flight line, because there are places you weep and places you do not, and I had learned the difference on the very road he was talking about. But I felt it, the whole weight of it, 12 years of it, and I felt the apron behind me understand, all at once, in a single held breath, exactly what it had watched happen when a sergeant decided a woman with a ruck could not last an hour. "Lance Corporal Kimball didn't come off that road, sir," I said, because if he was going to say it on the record, then it was going to be the whole record. "He was 19. Sinclair's face did not flinch from it. That is the measure of the man, and it is why I could take what he offered. "I know," he said. "I know his name too, Major. Wesley Kimball. I have carried both of them." He let that sit. Then he said, "May I walk with you? I have exactly 11 minutes before a briefing I do not care about, and I would rather spend them with you than with any general on this base." "Yes, sir," I said, and I want to tell you what did not happen next, because what did not happen is the whole of what I am. The sergeant did not get destroyed. There was no scene. The general did not turn and find him and take him apart in front of the flight line, though every Marine standing in that ring was braced for exactly that, some of them, I think, hoping for it. Sinclair, walking past the detail with me at his side, looked at the sergeant once, for exactly as long as it takes to be remembered and no longer, and he said, in a voice pitched mild and even, and therefore 10 times worse than a shout, "Sergeant, you had a Silver Star recipient carrying her own ruck across your flight line this morning. I watched the end of it from the car." He let the pause do the work. "Think about that. Think about it for a while." And then he kept walking, and the sergeant was left standing at rigid attention with that landing inside him, and I understood that Sinclair had done to him, in one sentence, exactly what I had done at the terminal door, which is to hand a man his own conscience and let it be heavier than any punishment. Master Sergeant Ardsley had come out onto the apron. He was standing near the terminal, and as the general and I walked past, Ardsley caught my eye, and something moved across his weathered face, and I realized he understood that the tired woman he had brought a cone of water to had been the whole time exactly the person he had treated her as, which is to say, a Marine worth a kindness for no reason at all. He gave me the smallest nod. I gave it back. Of everyone on that flight line, Ardsley was the only one who had nothing to reconsider, because he had gotten it right when it cost him nothing and bought him nothing, and that is the only test that has ever counted with me. Sinclair and I walked the length of the apron, in the heat, and we talked for 11 minutes about a road in a valley 12 years gone, about the 11 who came home and the one who did not, about his grandchildren, 2 of them now, who existed because of a decision I made in the first 10 seconds of an ambush when I was 29, and everyone had told me the day was a milk run. We had never really talked about it, he and I. That is the strange thing about the road. The people who share the worst hour of your life are often the people you never sit down with afterward. Because the sharing was so total that words feel like a downgrade. He had been a colonel pinned at the far end of the valley, a voice on my radio going from clipped to hoarse, and I had been the convoy commander who was supposed to turn around. And between us there had been about 400 meters of road that the enemy owned, and we had never once, in 12 years, described that road to each other out loud. So we described it now, walking slow along the apron, with the aircraft ticking as they cooled. I told him what it had looked like from my end. The lead vehicle going up, the pressure change, the wall side opening up, the half second where every instinct in my body and every line in every manual said fall back, consolidate, call it in, and the other half second where I understood that his element was worse off than we were, pinned and shrinking, and that the road between us was the only road there was. I told him about giving the order to push forward, and about the staff sergeant who had spent the morning double-checking me, and how when I said we were going forward, he had looked at me for exactly 1 beat, and then said, "Aye, ma'am," and put his truck in gear. And how I have loved that man ever since for that 1 beat and that 1 aye, because it was the sound of a mine changing under fire, which is the rarest sound there is. I told him about the fight up the road, how we had used the trucks as a moving wall, how we had put fire on the wall side and driven straight into the narrow place that I had told operations twice that I did not like. Because the thing you fear is very often exactly the thing you have to run toward. How we had reached his element, or what was left of it holding, and I had put my vehicles crosswise to make a blocking position, a steel wall across the road, and we had held it, not cleanly, not the way it reads in an award citation. We held it the way you hold a door against a flood, with your whole body and your friends' whole bodies, and a great deal of noise and no certainty at all that it would be enough. And then I told him the part I do not tell, because he had earned it and because he already half knew it. His radio operator had been in a vehicle that took a hit, and the vehicle had begun to burn, and I had gotten to the passenger side and hooked my hands under the young man's arms and pulled, with my boots slipping in the dirt and the heat of it on my face, and I had gotten him out, and I had put him behind the engine block of my own truck and screamed into a handset for a medical evacuation bird until my voice tore, and the bird had come, low and beautiful and impossibly loud, and it had taken him and it had taken others, and most of them lived, most of them. That is the word that lives at the center of every true war story. Most. "I never knew it was you who pulled Danner out," Sinclair said quietly, using a name I had not spoken, the radio operator's name, a man I had heard was doing well now, married, out of the service, whole. I knew someone did. In the after-action, it was just a line. The convoy commander recovered the casualty under fire. "A line, Major. You were a line in a document for 12 years. "That is what most of it is, sir," I said. "Lines and documents. That is what the work is." "Not today," he said. "Today, you are not a line." He asked me about Kimball then, gently, the way you ask about a grave. And I told him. Lance Corporal Wesley Kimball, 19, my radio operator on my truck, who had asked me an hour before whether we would see anything, and whom I had told we would be home for chow. When the blocking position was holding and the bird was inbound, there had been a moment, one of those moments a valley gives you where it seems for a heartbeat that you might actually all get out of it, and in that moment a burst had come from the wall side, and Kimball, who was up feeding me the radio the way a good operator does, who was doing exactly his job, exactly right, had gone down, and there had been nothing to pull him back from. Some men you carry out, some men the road keeps. I have made my peace with the fact that I will never fully understand why it is one and not the other, and I have refused, for 12 years, to insult either of them by pretending I do. Sinclair listened to all of it without once looking away, which is a harder thing than it sounds, and when I finished, he was quiet for a dozen steps. And when the 11 minutes were up, he stopped, and he took my hand in both of his, and he said, "The base commander knows you're reporting. Your billet's waiting. But I wanted your first hour here to be the truth, Major, and not whatever that sergeant thought he saw. You've spent 12 years being read wrong by people who never bothered to check. I did not want this base to be one more." "Thank you, sir," I said. "Don't thank me," he said. I'm 11 minutes late to a briefing because thanking you is more important. That's not generosity. That's just arithmetic I should have done 12 years ago. And he let go of my hand, and he walked to the aircraft, 3 stars and a gray head, and I stood alone on the apron with my ruck at my feet, home, for now, and read correctly at last, in front of everyone. The days after a thing like that are stranger than the thing itself. The flight line was a different place the next morning and the morning after that. Word travels on a base faster than any aircraft on it, and by the time I reported to my new section, the whole story had already arrived ahead of me, grown a little in the telling the way stories do, and I spent my first week being looked at with the particular careful respect that people extend when they are afraid they might have been one of the ones who got it wrong. I did not correct the story, and I did not enjoy it. I had a job to do, and the job was not being a legend. The job was moving things from where they were to where they were needed, the same job I have always had, and I put my head down and did it. Master Sergeant Ardsley became, without either of us ever discussing it, a fixture at the edge of my days, a steady presence who brought me the ground truth of the section the way he had once brought me a cone of water, and I came to rely on him the way you rely on the one person in a building who tells you what is actually happening, rather than what you would like to hear. I trusted him because I had watched him be decent to a stranger, and nothing he did afterward ever made me revise it. He told me, near the end of that first week, leaning in my doorway with 2 cups of coffee, that the story had already gotten loose among the senior enlisted and had started doing a job I had not asked it to do. The staff non-commissioned officers were telling it to their juniors, he said, not the way a rumor gets told, for the thrill of it, but the way a lesson gets told, deliberately, with a point on the end. You never know who you are talking to. That was the point they were putting on it. You never know whose ruck you are shoving into the dirt. I was not sure how I felt about that. There is a particular discomfort in becoming a cautionary tale while you are still alive to hear it told. I had spent my whole career trying to be a person and not a symbol, because symbols are easy to admire and easy to ignore, and they do none of the actual work. And here I was becoming a symbol on a base I had lived on for 6 days. I said as much to Ardsley, and he considered it over his coffee in the unhurried way he considered everything. With respect, ma'am, he said, you don't get a vote on that part. You be a person. Let the story be a story. The juniors need the story more than they need to meet you, and the ones who are any good will figure out there's a person under it, and the ones who aren't wouldn't have learned it from meeting you anyway. He drank his coffee. That's just how it works. You did the thing. Now the thing belongs to everybody. That's not a robbery. That's the whole reason we tell each other anything. I have thought about that a great many times since. He was right, of course. He usually was. The story stopped being mine the moment the general said my name in the sun, and the useful thing to do was not to guard it, but to make sure the version that traveled was the true one, the one with Kimball in it, the one where being right did not make you whole, the one where the door gets left open behind you. A story you cannot control is still yours to keep honest. The junior Marine, the sunburned Lance Corporal, whose name I learned was Buckley, came to find me on my 3rd day. He stood in the doorway of my office for a while before he knocked, gathering himself. And when I looked up, he came to a position of attention so rigid it was almost painful to watch. Ma'am, he said, I need to say something, and I don't know how to say it. Then say it plainly, Lance Corporal, I said. Plain is always the way. I laughed, he said. His face was red, and not from the sun this time. On the apron, when Sergeant Vance. I laughed, ma'am. I knew it was wrong, and I laughed anyway because he's my sergeant and I didn't want to be the one who didn't, and I felt sick about it for 3 days. I put down my pen and I looked at him. This boy, 20 years old, who had driven all the way here on his own guilt. And I thought about Wes Kimball, who had been about his age, and who had also once laughed too easily and said, ma'am, like it tasted good. And I decided to give Buckley the first real lesson of his career, the one nobody had thought to give me until a road did it the hard way. You want to know the whole of what you did wrong, I said. It wasn't the laugh. The laugh was just the symptom. What you did wrong was you decided your behavior depended on who was watching. You looked at me and you saw someone who couldn't help you or hurt you, and you let that set the terms. That's the mistake. That's the only mistake. You don't get to choose when someone's watching, Lance Corporal. Half the time, the person watching is someone you wrote off, so there's only one way to live that works. You carry yourself like someone's always watching, and you be decent to the people who can do nothing for you, because those are the only two rules that hold up when the car pulls in and the name turns out to be somebody's. He stood there and took it. Yes, ma'am. Now, I said, you've apologized and I've accepted it, and it's finished. I'm not going to carry it, and neither should you. Go help square away the section. And Buckley. He stopped at the door. The fact that it made you sick for 3 days is the best thing about you. Don't lose that. That's your conscience working. A lot of men let it rust. He went, and I watched him go, and I thought that maybe the road took Wes Kimball and left me here, in part to say that sentence to boys like Buckley for the rest of my career, and that if that was the arrangement, it was not the worst arrangement, though I would trade every word of it to have Kimball back. That night, in the transient quarters where I was living until my household goods arrived, I unpacked the ruck, the same ruck, and in the bottom of it, wrapped in a sock the way I have carried it for 12 years, was the small, laminated photograph. A dog, a gap-toothed grin, a boy of 19 who had a photograph of a dog taped inside his helmet and who is, in the only picture I keep, laughing at something just outside the frame. I have carried that photograph through 8 moves and 4 deployments and a marriage that did not survive the woman I had to be to do this work. I have carried it because Wes Kimball did not get to carry anything anywhere ever again, and it seemed the least a person could do, to keep carrying a small laminated square of a boy and his dog through all the rooms he would never stand in. There were years, early on, when I could not look at it. There were years when I took it out every single night as a kind of penance, as though staring at it hard enough might rearrange the arithmetic of that road. Neither of those was healthy, and a chaplain and a good deal of time eventually walked me to a steadier place, where I could hold it without either flinching or bleeding, and simply remember, which is all the dead actually ask of us, that we remember them accurately without turning them into either saints or lessons. 11 men went home off that road. 1 did not. I have never once told that story as a victory, and I did not start that night, no matter how many stars had gotten out of a car to say my name in the sun. Recognition, when it finally comes, does not taste the way you imagined it would when you were young and starving for it. It tastes like grief as much as pride, because it arrives carrying everyone who is not there to see it. Sinclair went home. His 11 went home. Their children exist, and a boy from somewhere flat and green does not, and no citation, no general, no flight line full of Marines suddenly getting it right changes that arithmetic by a single digit. I write a note to Wes Kimball's mother every year. I have done it for 12 years, and I have never missed one, and I never say very much, because there is not very much you can say that does not curdle into either pity or performance, and she deserves neither. I just tell her that I remember him, and that I am still doing the work, and that his name is safe with me. That night I had something to add, and I sat at the little government desk in the transient quarters, and I wrote it out longhand. I told her that a lieutenant general had said her son's name out loud, on a flight line, in front of everyone, without being asked. I told her that Wesley Kimball was on the record, in the mouth of a man with 3 stars, 12 years after the road, and that he always would be now, because I would keep saying it too, for as long as I had breath and rank enough to make people listen. I told her that her son mattered to men who never met him, and that he always would. I do not know if those letters help her. I have wondered for 12 years whether they are a kindness to a grieving mother or a selfishness dressed as a kindness, a way for me to lay something down once a year that I have no right to hand to her. She wrote back, once in the 2nd year, a short note in careful handwriting, and she said only that she reads them on his birthday, and that she is glad someone who was there thinks of him, and that I should stop apologizing in the spaces between my sentences, because she has never once blamed me and never will. I have kept that note as long as I have kept the photograph. It is the closest thing to absolution I expect to be offered in this life, and it came, the way the truest things always seem to, from the person who had the most standing to withhold it and chose not to. Being right and being whole are not the same country. I learned that a long time ago, and I have spent my life traveling between the two, and the passage is never free. I was right, on the apron, when I picked up my own ruck and refused the sergeant his performance. I was right at the terminal door when I gave him after instead of a wound. But being right did not make me whole. Being whole is a slower and lonelier project, and it is built out of exactly this: a desk lamp, an envelope, a boy's name written where his mother will read it, the long, steady refusal to let the road have the last word. I sealed the envelope. I turned off the lamp. And I sat for a while in the dark of a strange room on a new base, and I let the day be as heavy as it actually was, which is a thing I do not often allow myself, and then I let it go, the way you have to, if you mean to be any use in the morning. A week later, Sergeant Vance requested to see me. He came to my office at the end of a duty day, and he stood in the doorway the way Buckley had, except that Vance was not a boy, and the thing on his face was not a boy's guilt. It was heavier and more complicated. He came to attention, and he held it, and he waited. "At ease, Sergeant," I said. Sit down." He sat on the edge of the chair, like a man who did not expect to be there long. "Ma'am," he said, "I keep waiting for the other boot to drop." I understood him. He had spent a week bracing for the hammer. He had run the whole thing forward in his mind 100 times, the counseling, the paperwork, the fitness report that would follow him for years, the quiet word from a general that could end a career before it properly started. He had shoved a major's ruck onto the ground in front of witnesses, and the major had turned out to be a Silver Star recipient that a lieutenant general crossed a flight line to honor, and a smart man in his position spends the following week waiting to be destroyed. "There's no boot, Sergeant," I said. He looked at me like he did not believe it. "I'm going to tell you something," I said, "and I want you to actually hear it, not just wait for me to finish. You did not fail on that apron because you were cruel to a major. You didn't know I was a major. You failed because you were cruel to a person you had decided was no one. That's the version of you I watched. And here's what should scare you about it. That version shows up every single time you think it's safe. It showed up because you thought nobody who mattered was watching. So the fix is not to be more careful about who you insult. The fix is to become a man who doesn't have a version of himself that comes out when he thinks no one's counting." He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am." "You want to make it right," I said. "You don't do it with me. I'm already fine. You do it with the next tired person who comes across your flight line looking like they can't do anything for you. You bring them a chair, you bring them water, you point them the right way, and you carry their bag if they'll let you. You do that 100 times when there's no general in the car, and after a while you won't be the man who shoved a ruck. You'll be a different man. That's the only apology I care about, and it's not to me, and it takes years, and you should start today." He stood up. Something in him had changed, or begun to. "The other boot," he said. "There really isn't one." "There's a standard, Sergeant," I said. "Meet it and we're square. That's better than a boot. A boot ends. A standard is something you get to keep." He came to attention, and this time it was not fear, it was something cleaner, and he said, "Aye, ma'am." And he left, and I do not know for certain what became of him, because I have learned not to need to know how every story ends in order to have done my part in it right. But I heard months later, secondhand, that Sergeant Vance had chewed out a corporal for being short with a civilian contractor lost on the flight line, and had then personally walked the contractor to the right hangar and carried his toolbox. And I chose to believe that was the beginning of the different man, and I let that belief be enough. I took my first real walk of the flight line as its new staff officer at the end of that second week. At dusk, when the heat finally lets go of the apron and the light comes in low and gold across the concrete and the aircraft sit quiet on the ramp like animals asleep. The Marines who had laughed watched me pass now, and they did not laugh, and I let that be enough too. I did not need them to be sorry forever. I needed them to be better tomorrow. Those are different requests, and only one of them is fair, and I have made my peace with asking only for the fair one. I stood at the edge of the apron, in the last of the light, with my gear finally stowed in real quarters, with my name known now on a base that had not known it 2 weeks before, with a general's words on the record and a boy's name in an envelope, and a sergeant somewhere out there, learning to be a different man. And I thought about the woman who had walked across that same concrete 14 days earlier with 60 pounds on her back and no rank on her clothes, mistaken for no one, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt steady. Those are different feelings, and I have come to prefer the second one. Triumph burns off by morning. Steadiness you can build a life on. A young Marine ran past me on the apron just then, late for something, and he slowed when he saw me, and he came to a proper halt and greeted me by rank and name, and there was nothing in his face but ordinary respect, the plain kind that is owed to anyone doing the work, and I sent him on his way. That, I thought, was the real measure of the 2 weeks. Not the general, not the car, not the whole flight line holding its breath in the sun, just a boy in a hurry who saw a major and treated her like one, because on this base that was simply the truth now, and the truth, once it finally arrives, has a way of becoming so ordinary that people forget it was ever in question. That is the best thing that can happen to a hard-won truth. It gets boring, it becomes the weather, nobody marvels at it anymore. They just live inside it and let it be the air and go where they are going. If you have ever been treated as though you could not possibly belong in a room you earned, as though the weight you were carrying must be too much for you because of how you looked while you carried it, then I am talking to you now, and I want you to hear it plainly. You do not owe anyone the performance of proving it. You do not have to rear up when they poke you, or flush, or make the small hurt sound they are fishing for. You are allowed to simply pick up your own ruck and keep walking and let the silence that follows belong to them. The truth of who you are does not get lighter or heavier based on who is looking at it. It weighs exactly what it weighs, whether a sergeant sneers at it or a general crosses a flight line to salute it, and your only job, on the good days and the invisible ones, is to carry it well. So carry your own weight. Be decent to the people who believe you are no one, because that decency is the truest thing you own, and no one can take it or fake it. Let the truth arrive in its own time, on its own terms, and it will, because it always does, in a folded sheet of paper, in a car that leaves the line, in a name said out loud in the sun. And when it arrives, when the whole room finally sees what you were the entire time, be the kind of person who leaves the door open behind you for the next tired soul crossing the concrete with too much on their back and no one yet who knows their name. That is the whole of what a road in a valley taught me and a flight line reminded me, and it is the only thing I have that is worth passing on. The end.